NFL training camps are in full swing. The preseason is finally here. That means fantasy drafts are underway everywhere. So let's break down some of my favorite sleepers for the 2025 season in this midweek edition of Best Available. If you're looking to learn more about the game through stats, film, a sprinkle of inside information, be sure to subscribe to Best Available and follow us on socials at Best Available YT. We have plenty of content coming weekly, so be sure to subscribe. Before we begin, as far as the criteria for how we're choosing our sleepers, this is going to be redraft. I'm going to go with half PPR scoring just so we can get a little bit of a mix of players that be valuable in standard versus just true PPR. As far as average draft position for these sleepers, I'm going outside of the top 10 for quarterbacks and tight ends. I still want to find some guys that are starting caliber. And then I wanted to challenge myself a little bit at running back and wide receiver, so we're going to go outside of the top 25 for those. That's really it. So let's go ahead and dive into it. Starting at quarterback, I'm going to take Dak Prescott. Dallas Cowboys fans can rejoice. The rest of the league is probably sick and tired of hearing about the Cowboys with how busy their offseason has been regarding Micah Parsons, the George Pickens trade. But from a pure fantasy value, I can absolutely see why people would want to take Dak as a starting caliber option, despite being outside of the top 10 in ADP. This feels like the ultimate buy low candidate at the position after a nightmare scenario in Dallas last season. Dak gets hurt, has a season-ending hamstring injury, and while he doesn't have the rushing ability that a lot of these top-end fantasy assets have, he's been a historically very effective passer, especially from a fantasy perspective in the past. I think a lot of people forget we're talking about the third highest scoring quarterback in 2023 with Dak, and he was ahead of the likes of Lamar Jackson, of Patrick Mahomes. I think Prescott can get closer to that 2023 form than his 2024 form, not only because of a healthy season, but also the arrival of Pickens. I think his presence as an alpha X receiver really opens up things for CeeDee Lamb at the Z. I think there's some legitimate weapons on this offense, and I think the backfield at least has to be respected a bit more this year, where last year I think it was such an afterthought. Defenses could just really hone in on the pass. But I do think the additions of Miles Sanders, Jaden Blue, Javonte Williams could really make this an effective team that I'm actually pretty interested in this offense. I have some questions about the defense, but from a fantasy perspective, you want a questionable defense for your quarterback. Make these shootouts, make these high-scoring games, maybe even make them, games where it's a reverse game script and the Cowboys are just forced to air it out. It just means more opportunities for your fantasy quarterback to put up points. And again, I get there's not the rushing ability that you want for Dak Prescott, but he's QB 13. If you already have a top-tier quarterback and maybe Dak slides, or you're really prioritizing other positions and then you find yourself scrambling for that QB later in the draft, I think Dak's a really solid option. I can't believe I'm going with a Purdue guy at running back, but I think I have to. I just really enjoy the player, and that's Tyrone Tracy Jr. for the New York Giants, a guy that I had last year in fantasy as a late round flyer and came away pretty surprised, especially in these half PPR leagues. We're talking about a former college wide receiver that converted to running back and had a pretty dang solid season, over 1,000 total yards, finished 26th in scoring in half PPR among running backs, had 6 touchdowns, had another 38 catches, which is pretty solid for a rookie, especially if you're in these half PPR and PPR leagues. And I think the elephant in the room is the arrival of Cam Scatabo, right? Big-bodied power back. In another era, he's probably a Mike Allstott type of fullback, but we're concerned probably about the usage splits, right? And in my opinion, I think Scatabo should be reserved more for short yardage goal line touches. And yes, you can get worried about, Tracy getting touchdown vultured with some of those opportunities near the end zone, but I thought he may do quite well with scoring wise with just 6 touchdowns last season. I really think Tracy can have a more diverse role with Scadabo's arrival. In fact, I think there are more opportunities for him to catch passes out of the backfield, be that kind of guy on third downs, maybe motion into the slot. I think there's a lot of fun ways you can utilize Tracy, and I really think he was just scratching the surface of what he can be as an NFL running back. Again, we're talking about a college wide receiver that's still learning the nuances of the position. So I'm very interested in him. I think RB30 is crazy low for, the potential value you're getting. Yes, the caveat is you're worried about a player on the New York Giants offense. Is it Russ at quarterback? It's going to be at least a start, but then do they go to Jameis Winston or Jackson Dart? A lot of unknowns at the quarterback position, but I really like Tracy as a player, and I think if you need this RB2 flex or just some depth, I think Tracy's a pretty solid add. At wide receiver, I genuinely can't believe this guy continues to be drafted so low, but it's Jacobi Meyers with the Las Vegas Raiders. He is wide receiver 41 in ADP for half PPR scoring. And I think this is a player that just consistently gets overlooked year after year. And, you could be like, yeah, he's a solid player, but how about fantasy production? He's been a top 25 wide receiver in total scoring each of the last 3 seasons, and just outside of top 25 in average points per game. Very legitimate playmaker who's always had to kind of take a backseat as either a wide receiver 2 behind Devontae Adams, or simply not getting the target share that you'd kind of want with Brock Bowers as the primary, target share guy at even being a tight end for the Raiders last season. But despite never being that primary guy, he continues to put up really reliable fantasy production. I think Meyers is also going to get a massive boost with Geno Smith at quarterback, because if you look historically, I think the argument can be made Geno's going to be the best quarterback Meyers has had throwing him the football at the NFL level. And I get that not everyone is a Geno Smith fan, but I think when he has time in the pocket, his ability in the intermediate and deep game is pretty damn impressive. And I think that's going to lead to some, maybe not a ton of targets, but I think the targets are going to be much more valuable than they've been in previous years. I think that plus a revamped coaching staff with Pete Carroll and offensive coordinator Chip Kelly, I think Chip Kelly's ready to take a step forward again in the NFL. I know he had, took some real lumps as the head coach for the Eagles, but the way he's evolved as a coach at the NFL and college game, I thought he did a tremendous job coaching at Ohio State this past season. Obviously, they go to win a national title. But I think all of the pieces are in place for Meyers to finally establish himself as that veteran number 1 receiver. And I don't know if he's going to have number 1 production, but in the context of this offense, I think he's going to have a pretty dang good year. And I think it's going to result in him being, horribly undervalued in fantasy drafts. So if you see him there in the later rounds, I think he's a phenomenal wide receiver 2 asset for any fantasy owner, whether you're in standard or PPR leagues. And for tight end, let's go with...
Do it. Take Kyle Pitts.
Sorry about that. Anyway, at tight end, we're going to go with Tyler Warren, the rookie tight end for the Indianapolis Colts. If you're new to the channel, I highly recommend you watch the video from earlier this week about how Warren can unlock the Colts offense. I had a chance to go to Colts training camp practice, talk to offensive coordinator Jim Bob Cooter, and got some good insight from the beat writers about how he's being utilized. Sounds like he's every bit as advertised already in camp. Sounds like they're planning to utilize him all over. I wouldn't be surprised to see some rushing attempts sprinkled in there, honestly. If you remember during his time at Penn State, this was a wildcat quarterback, there's a fullback, a tight end, a receiver, a center on trick plays. There's so many different ways he can be utilized, and the Colts seem to be leaning into that. I think there's a lot of different ways he's going to get the ball in his hands, which is, very exciting for fantasy owners, even if it's a little scary to take a rookie tight end. And I get it. Some owners are probably going to be more heavily leaning towards Colston Loveland on the Bears if they are going to take a rookie tight end. And, I'll give you, if you're in a PPR league, I think there's total value in that. But I'll be honest, I think the opportunities in the red zone near the goal line for Warren are so diverse, and I think there's a lot of ways they're going to try and get him the ball in the end zone. I think that touchdown volume or opportunity for touchdown volume to me is way more appealing than Loveland's, hypothetical target share. I think there's a lot of mouths to feed on that Chicago offense. And yes, Loveland will be utilized more as a slot guy where Warren will play all over, but I just really like the upside as far as actual scoring in real games for Warren. I think he's a hell of a player. I think he's going to be a ton of fun to watch. So, again, if you want to go Loveland and PPR, I understand. But for me, half PPR standard, I'm going Warren. I'm very high on him. Again, watch the video from earlier this week if you want to know more about the Colts tight end. All right, let's finish up with a flex. Not an honorable mention, but I think this guy has to be talked about because you can admit it to yourself. You want Travis Hunter on your fantasy team. Hunter is currently sitting at wide receiver 30 in ADP, and depending on what kind of league you're in, there is a chance that he goes even lower than that. There's probably a lot of friends in your fantasy league that are very spooked by the potential of him either playing two ways or primarily playing cornerback, and I get all that, but let me show you a clip from the Rich Eisen show. Head coach Liam Cohen of the Jacksonville Jaguars talking about the utilization of Travis Hunter, talking about some potential high usage on offense.
If you're saying you're going to play 65 to 75 snaps on offense, let's call it, right?
Yeah.
And, if he's playing 80% of those snaps or so, and then similar, defensively, and you look at trying to be able to match that number as much as possible.
Okay.
It's
Sure.
Do not show your fantasy opponents that clip. Maybe they'll find it on their own. Don't do them any favors. Keep this information to yourself. The potential of Hunter playing 80% offensive snaps is massive and quite exciting if you are considering taking him in leagues, because why would you not? I don't know if the average NFL fan who doesn't watch a lot of college football understands just how special of a talent that Travis Hunter really is. They probably know him as, yes, the Heisman winner, but there's this narrative that it's only because he played both ways. Watch his wide receiver tape. This is a guy with unreal body control, separation ability, track speed. He's taller than you'd expect, around 6'3". Like, there's legitimate skill set here, and Danny Kelly with the Ringer Fantasy Show has described the way he plays receiver, not the production or ability, but like of a Justin Jefferson type, and I don't think he's totally wrong. And I can't imagine being in a better situation for a wide receiver than being on this Jaguars offense with a brilliant offensive mind in Liam Cohen, a franchise quarterback in Trevor Lawrence, despite what some people want to think about him, and then a certified, bona fide star already at the position in Brian Thomas Jr., who can stretch the field vertically and open up all this stuff underneath for Hunter. On top of everything else, I love the talent, I love the player, I love the human. I just think that wide receiver 30 is way too low for a player I really believe is a future star in this league, and I don't think it's going to take him very long to prove that. Those are my favorite sleepers for the season. Who do you have as your favorite sleepers for 2025? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious for your guys' takes. I always put that input in consideration in my own draft. So, I'm helping you out. You help me out a little bit. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, please subscribe. Thank you for all the support over the last 2 weeks of reviving the channel. The growth's been insane. Cannot thank you enough for that. So we'll be back later this week with another college breakdown, this time on a certain Notre Dame running back. And then we might talk about another former Notre Dame running back next week. Looking forward to all of that. We'll see you later this week. Take care. Thank you so much for watching. Best available.